We welcome everyone back into another virtual session here with the CPaaS Acceleration Alliance. We're excited to have two more guests joining us this week that are experts in the space. We'll be covering messaging today. There will clearly be a few challenges along the way, and I look forward to talking through this with Mr. Nick Lane and Scott Warner, who have joined us today that have a lot of great experience in the messaging space. So welcome to our session here today, gentlemen.
Thank you. Hello.
All right. Hi. Nick, let's start with you. Give us a little introduction and a little background on MobileSquared.
So MobileSquared's been going for 15 years. We've been specializing in messaging for about 11 years now, focusing primarily on SMS and A2P SMS, and then obviously broadening that out to RCS and RBM, and then WhatsApp. And now more recently, we've obviously expanded to include the CPaaS. So we've got a very deep understanding of CPaaS. And within that, we cover 14 channels. But within those channels, we do also cover MMS, we cover Apple Messages for Business, Viber, Facebook Messenger, and a kind of umbrella category of kind of OTT other apps. So within that, we look at Line, KakaoTalk, WeChat, anything emerging such as Telegram as well. So we've got these days a very kind of broad view on messaging from not just the industry, from actual traffic and spend patterns, but we've got a lot of consumer behavior as well.
That's excellent. And I think particularly for our guests joining from North America, they don't realize when we say messaging that it's more than SMS. There's so many more channels and opportunities to really engage both employees as well as customers, which I think that's an area that we'll definitely get into as we continue our conversation. Scott, welcome. Give us a little introduction and what you're working on.
Hi, thanks for the invitation. My name's Scott Warner. I'm the Director of Emerging Services at S&BTS. S&BTS is a joint venture between SoftBank, the Japanese mobile operator, and BTS, which is Business Telecommunication Services. We're in a pretty unique position where we have a little bit of a triangle going on. We're a mobile operator. We have a pretty much a wholesale background, and we work with multiple enterprises around the world. So we provide CPaaS services with a focus on the connectivity piece across predominantly voice, numbering, and of course messaging. My role within the organization is pretty much everything related to messaging. So that covers, as you mentioned, SMS, of course, but also across the kind of OTT messaging channels as well. And my background is I've spent just over 10 years in the messaging business, so in predominantly focused on SMS, so working for a couple of SMS aggregators, and then more recently looking at the omni-channel services, two-way services, and all of the, let's say, emerging use cases for messaging.
Excellent. It'll be great to get that carrier and end user perspective along with some of the rich data and analysis that Nick and his team has done. So I think this will be a great conversation. If I look at the report that we just released last week, the 2023 State of CPaaS report, I think one of the first lines that was a headline is, what is CPaaS, with a question mark? It's much more than SMS and APIs. So Nick, as I kind of state that, and as we look at the evolution of CPaaS and the role that messaging is playing there, maybe touch on a little bit what you pulled out of our report, but I'm also very interested in the data that you have surrounding that with different regions and channels and so forth, and the role that messaging is playing in this next generation of what we're referring to as CPaaS 3.0.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think from our perspective, I think the classification of what CPaaS is changes. From our view, we look at CPaaS as the direct connection between a brand and consumer that connect via an API. and our forecasts are based on that spend. And as I mentioned, we break things out by channel and 14 channels. But I think a lot of where we are, what we're already seeing, as as you referred to it within the report, is 3.0. I think we're getting there, but I think a lot of what we are seeing in terms of spend, from our perspective, is that the majority of spend, and it's about 60. There's too many numbers to actually remember, but for 2022, for our forecast, 62% of CPaaS spend was on SMS. So again, that's it's such a strong channel without kind of, I think, a lot of companies actually realizing how powerful it is. But we expect it to drop its share spend across CPaaS to about 50% by 2026. And then that's other channels are emerging. It's more a case of, I think, the CPaaS providers kind of probably expanding their reach and bringing in, I think, major kind of enterprises and large businesses in particular are consolidating their CPaaS provider into maybe just the one provider, whereas at the moment they've got kind of a siloed provider across each channel. But within that, you're going to start to see other channels emerge, and that's where rich messaging is going to play a very strong role, and driving that is going to be WhatsApp, despite the fact that a lot of the focus of the industry for the last 5-6 years has been around RCS. What's actually really happening is WhatsApp Business is now starting to make quite a strong play. It's big already in Brazil and India, and now we're starting to see it move in other markets, certain parts in Asia, Latin America, and parts of Europe as well. So we kind of think, it's a cliche. We're not going to say this is year of WhatsApp Business, but it could be the year of WhatsApp Business. That's going to be the channel that's really going to start to drive things from a rich messaging perspective. Obviously, you've got Viber that's already there and been going for about 6-7 years. But obviously that's kind of restricted to, the markets where Viber has quite a strong presence, whereas WhatsApp really does have that very strong global presence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Scott, Nick just used the term rich messaging. Maybe walk us through what makes it rich messaging, and maybe there's a key use case that you're familiar with where you can explain the difference between SMS and rich messaging. I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you consider the kind of next generation of messaging, the end user has an expectation on what that looks like. So when you take the good old fashioned SMS with its pretty, let's say, basic feature set, but its big advantages when it comes to ubiquity, global coverage, and the ability to reach any mobile handset on the planet. There's this whole new kind of world of rich messaging, which means all of the additional features when it comes to images, pictures, video, and all sorts of rich features that we've seen that used. Actually, there's many marketing use cases that you can find online when it comes to using coupons, promotional messages, and all of this rich additional media really helps to improve the conversion rate of that. The downside of it is, as I mentioned, the reach, and this is what Nick mentioned as well, the potential reach of that. But as we see markets develop, we've seen a greater uplift in the usage of these rich channels. And I think when you look at the development that WhatsApp has had, and as a user, as a day-to-day user for P2P messaging, for most of us, the idea of sending a photo over a message channel isn't so miraculous. We do it every single day. So I think the idea of a business being able to send send imagery over an SMS or over a message, should I say, shouldn't be that out of this world. But of course, with the limitations on the SMS technology, I think we'll see, and we've seen already all sorts of use cases come out of that. But there is still this challenge of the fact that the channels aren't ubiquitous. They aren't worldwide. They aren't available on every handset. We see massive fragmentation, and actually, we've seen more fragmentation, I would say, and maybe Nick or you, Kevin, have data to back this up or not. But I've on an anecdotal level seen huge amounts of fragmentation in the messaging market. So as much as we've seen WhatsApp as probably the front runner in certain markets, we see other markets, especially across Asia, but even Latin America and the US, where there's other messaging channels, whether it's Viber, Kakao Talk in Korea, it might be Ding Talk in China, it might be WeChat, and yeah, there's literally hundreds of others.
Right.
So I think that will always be the challenge for rich messaging, to try and understand how do we tackle that fragmented messaging ecosystem.
Right. No, I often joke that SMS is really the largest social network out there, right? To your point that
exactly.
It can't get any handset, right? But if we look at rich messaging, the ability to, as you're saying, share rich media, but also, being able to plug calendar into the actual message stream. I believe you can even do things like catalogs inside the message stream. And so, what you're able to do there is quite remarkable, and I think very impactful for businesses, right? So Nick, as you looked at the data and in your research, maybe walk us through a little bit of what the key use cases are today, but what you see, you have some good numbers of growth over the next couple of years. What are the new use cases that you're seeing, whether that's rich messaging or a better use of even SMS, that kind of helps us get to that bigger number that we think that the industry is going to get to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think if you look at it where we are with the industry today, there's a lot of fear, because when it comes to, if you look at messaging from a holistic perspective, there's a lot of fear among operators that rich messaging is actually going to cannibalize their SMS revenues, A2P SMS revenues in particular. But if you actually look at the use cases at play today, they're very kind of complementary and supplementary. So if you look at WhatsApp, for example, the majority of WhatsApp has, WhatsApp itself, since its launch for WhatsApp Business since 2018, has been inbound customer care. And that's how, and it's a very smart move, really, from WhatsApp in that it's really allowed them to control the channel. It's something that I know we'll get onto later in terms of the potential threat from fraud over SMS and how that could play out on rich messaging. But right now, WhatsApp have really managed that. And then if any brand wanted to then communicate and drive a communication to a database, it had to create its own WhatsApp database. So they had to opt in specifically for that. And they could only communicate with them once that user had driven an inbound communication. So that lasted up until 2021. Then in September, they changed the guidelines so you could then start to do outbound. But again, you had to build your own bespoke WhatsApp database. So that's been really key for brands to create a very controlled, safe environment that's also very secure. And they are basically sending the message that they want to send to their customer base. So you're starting to see lots of different services you're starting to see, some carousel like use cases for retailers. So, it's a great way of engaging consumers, because, there are so many people, there's 2.7 billion users globally on WhatsApp. But, I think part of the issue there is that when a lot of aggregators say, do you want to connect to 2.7 billion? You can't. And that's part of the issue. You've got to build that kind of relationship over the channel. And I think that's always been one of the issues. But I think people are starting to understand that, the effectiveness and the engagement levels of WhatsApp, and we'll see something similar with RCS at some point soon, are going to fundamentally change the way that brands and users communicate. Because I think part of the issue that we're seeing today is that when you talk to a brand about it, they just see that it's another channel I need to develop. But in actual fact, they've got the content, they've got it on their website, they've got it on an app. Really, because of the richness, all you really need to do is migrate that over. And then you've got another compelling, kind of mechanism, which is far more engaging than everything else, right to the, right to the center of their palm.
Exactly. No, I think you've hit a key point where rich messaging is actually going to be much easier for businesses to use and leverage than SMS. SMS, you kind of have to dumb things down and make it very simple as a point-to-point message, whereas to your point, you can actually take web content and bring that right into a rich message and bring that along. So Scott, is in your role as part of an operator, how do you look at rich messaging and WhatsApp? Is that something that as a carrier you can actually leverage, or is it just competitive to your base services?
Yeah, so I think Nick made a good point, which is I don't see these as substitute services, let's say. So the kind of fear around, and this has been over the last 10 years. 10 years ago there was this big fear about, okay, so SMS, how long can we kind of squeeze this channel? Because we all saw the rise of at the time it was Facebook and then WhatsApp, and all the different messaging products available. And actually instead it's become a complementary product. So, we have enterprises that have multiple different use cases. So if you take an airline, for example, if you take Lufthansa, so they're an airline that I fly with regularly. They communicate with me over all channels. So I receive emails from them. I receive boarding passes over WhatsApp. So I'll receive a PDF through WhatsApp. And then through SMS, I'll receive gate changes. So that just falls into their bundle, into their suite of products. I don't think any of those channels are competing with each other necessarily on any of those use cases. At the end of the day, sending a boarding pass over SMS is, well, it's possible with links and all sorts of different bits, but nowhere near as engaging as over WhatsApp. But then when I get my gate notification or a delay or gate change or anything that's urgent, let's say, when I'm in the airport, maybe I want to receive that over SMS, especially if I'm not data roaming in a different country, which is obviously a common use case. And I think there stands a role for each channel, and it's up to us really as CPaaS providers to help enterprises to navigate that. Nick, you mentioned it as well, that often an enterprise looks and goes, oh no, like another channel. But actually it just makes their communication way more effective, because they could have sent me the boarding pass over SMS and it would have been a link like probably most of us have received in the past. And because of our suspicions, we don't click the link. So instead we have to go online and have a more complex process. And then actually they also send follow-up offers as well. So, there's all of these different use cases across different channels. And I see it as just advantages for a business to sell, basically.
Right.
And I think also within your latest report, you describe some use cases within there, and one of them is a restaurant using WhatsApp. So two-way services where a customer can reach out to make a reservation in a restaurant, and there's no reason why potentially that confirmation goes over SMS, because we all know that that's a preferred channel for those more urgent notifications. So actually, in that scenario, probably that's creating an extra A2P SMS as well. So it's where the rich channel is then actually also supporting the traditional channels.
Right.
But you can see from that, sorry, Kevin, but from that example there, Scott, you've got, what a wonderful way you could actually, if you made the reservation, you know where that person's going to be. So that restaurant could potentially say, okay, you should be sat here. We could even send you the menu either before the booking or when you arrive, and you can actually make that booking. Because what's really interesting, certainly here in the UK, in the pandemic and following from the pandemic, kind of mobile, everywhere adopted mobile. You had QR codes everywhere. You still had social distancing, but if you went to a restaurant, went to a pub, you had a QR code on your table. You could order remotely. They'd then obviously bring it to you. Brilliant. You kind of think, well, it shouldn't need a pandemic to bring this kind of customer service to this industry, but it did. But it's disappeared. So all of a sudden now, pubs, you've got to go back to the bar. That whole experience has gone pretty quickly, but it shouldn't be like that. You should, as a user, have that opportunity. And there are one of the key things that we've talked about for a couple of years, and it's been picked up by a lot of companies, other trade bodies, is a number of businesses actually using SMS. So, based on our calculations, we've got it at less than 10% of all registered businesses actually use SMS. That's a tiny figure, and it shows that potentially, the organic growth in SMS could be enormous. But then, the flip side, and this is where CPaaS really comes into it as well, is that there are so many companies that don't use SMS but use other channels. So, that flip side, that can also grow. So, to then bring these two worlds together, really kind of shows the opportunity in your number of 100 billion by 2030. Is in all reality, if we get this right, it should, that should be probably quite conservative. Because if you start to look at where money's being spent, look at mobile advertising, look at digital advertising, marketing, etc. Hundreds, thousands, millions of companies are advertising and marketing. Now that spend can move into the CPaaS domain. Then you're going to have a behemoth of an industry.
No, I appreciate that. I think that's exactly what we're seeing, is that CPaaS ends up being the glue of sorts between all of these different engagements. And therefore, as you bring different channels and different use cases, you really get this exponential impact on the spend and the usability of these different services. Along those lines, I do want to touch on, we hear a lot about A2P in regards to messaging. There's been recently a lot said about P2A. And I think that's another way that we're going to engage both consumers as well as employees. Nick, can you touch on, maybe explain to our audience what P2A means and what impact that might have as well?
Yeah, sure. It's when the consumer initiates the conversation or the engagement with the brand. So we started to see, with RCS, for example, when that was starting to take off in the US a couple of years ago, and AT&T, for example, were doing quite a lot of chatbots across RCS. What it showed is once the consumer knew that there was a way of them initiating the conversation, they started using that in their droves, and usage went kind of through the roof. Because all of a sudden, it became more like a Google search engine, but a way of knowing that there were these brands within the messaging inbox, shall we say, within their messaging folder, or whatever you want to call it, on your device. Once they knew it was there, they started using it on a regular basis. And we're seeing with, as I mentioned, WhatsApp Business on customer care, because it's inbound, that's P2A. So, so the whole customer care element is a great way, I believe, and it's probably the best way of driving that P2A element for CPaaS moving forward. But because it's educating the consumer, and it's showing brands that actually by investing in these various channels, consumers are going to use it. And
It-
that's really compelling. And you've seen the same with Apple Messages for Business.
exactly. And I think as consumers, we've now been educated quite effectively on QR codes, right? And so even a plumber, driving down the road can have a QR code on the side of his van, and we can snap that, and that can bring that P to A experience where we can actually engage directly with the plumber. We could even schedule a visit, whatever. So again, I think it really impacts the small business and how we can bring messaging there through P2A. I think it also opens up the door for natural language and AI to have that big impact. Scott, is there particular use cases? What is your group doing as we look at AI and how that plays into the messaging world?
Yeah, I think so. Just to on to continue on the lines of the P2A discussion as well. You at the start of this year, you might have seen a company called Abla. So Abla is basically a search engine for messaging channels. You can find it if you type in Abla, and that's seen a huge uplift of usage. It was launched, I think, just around MWC time, so a couple of months ago. And basically, that's a service where an end user can search for anything, and it will come up with all of the various messaging channels that are available to them. So that's something that's shown the demand for P2A, and the demand from the end user as well. And then that leads into the AI conversation, which is how can we build out really effective, let's say, customer service, as an example, for users through bots, through learning, and through artificial intelligence. We've seen. I remember probably 4 or 5 years ago, when bots were first being used by some businesses in their communications channels. Very simplistic, but now the development has been very, very quick, and I think those bots will be that will be more and more effective, as time goes on.
It's also getting trust in the bots, though, isn't it? That's the key thing, because we've done research for clients looking at the customer care space, and again, there's an element of doubt from the consumer side at the moment when it comes to bots, depending on the complexity of kind of their query, but also from the brand perspective, in terms of what can the bot actually handle, so that you know that I think when they fully trust an AI is when there's not going to be an agent there in the background ready to kind of jump in and kind of help with that query. But I think what's interesting with ChatGPT is that all of a sudden everyone's talking about ChatGPT and bots.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's that educational process. So again, more and more people start to have more faith in the whole AI and machine learning space.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've all been in those horrible circles of customer service, where you're going through a bot questionnaire and it's not actually understanding the reason for the communication. So it takes time, and it takes product development, but I think if that once that's developed to a certain level, and as you say, Nick, that there's enough trust within the end user, then it could be remarkable, the potential savings that creates, and the potential improvements in customer service. So both
Absolutely.
customer experience improvements and cost savings on the business side.
But if you look at behavior as well, I could be sitting next to my children and they message me, so they're not going to make phone calls. They grow up in a world that's dominated by messaging and TikTok, and kind of, a really short attention span. So having a conversation just doesn't really happen over the phone. It's all about messaging. It's abbreviating words. how we communicate is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So messaging is going to be a wonderful way of kind of representing that and bringing that into the way that we engage between a consumer and a brand in various use cases.
And I mean, I to get a little bit, let's say, a little bit into the mechanics of messaging. You might be, I'm sure everyone's aware of the vulnerabilities of especially SMS, and the fact that we have one very dominant use case, which is the one-time password, which we still is the dominant use case on that channel when it comes to A2P SMS. And the question is, can AI be used to help clean up part of that business as well, to build a little bit more trust? Because my personal experience is that the enterprises that we deal with, they have massive concerns about SMS as a channel. Whereas it used to be SMS was the solid, reliable channel. That's kind of reduced into all of these issues with artificially inflated traffic. And it could be that artificial intelligence is one of the solutions to that problem. And I've seen even last week in Washington at ITW, I spoke to a number of businesses that are developing intelligence, let's say, and AI that can identify, let's call it unwanted traffic.
I think within this fraud element within SMS, it's got to be put into context with other channels. Mm-hmm. So if you actually look at what's potentially harmful to a consumer and what isn't, with our numbers in SMS, it's about 10% of all traffic is probably harmful, potentially harmful. So that's actually really low. So if you look at other channels, in terms of kind of not really from the effective point, but look at fraud, we saw that I think it's 42% on digital. Got to be careful to say here, advertising. Mm-hmm. Possibly, I imagine this could be to banners or something. Again, apologies for being vague, but about 42% of maybe the clicks are fraudulent and they're bots. So it could be through banner advertising in particular. I'd need to double check. But if that's at 42%, and looking at advertising and marketing, there's a big, big concern there about fraud, and there has been for 10, 15 years. As an industry within SMS and messaging, we're starting to become really worried about fraud, but in actual fact, it's still a small percentage in relation to other channels. So in actual fact, there's a lot of scaremongering going on. I don't think we need to do that just yet, but I think we do need to be very protective. And as you say, AI is coming along, and firewalls with AI are going to fundamentally change the network, and in terms of how they protect, because it's removing that human element.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that SMS has, and that us kind of SMS guys, our sensitivity to that fraud conversation, is that our number one use case is to do with verification. So it becomes like fundamental to the success of the channel. And I remember, again, when I was working for a couple of different aggregators, and when you're doing sales, the pitch is that you have this fantastic channel that's stable, that doesn't require an internet connection, that theoretically is more secure than an IP connection. And as soon as there becomes doubts in that, and that runs alongside the increasing costs that we see in the SMS market, the enterprise starts saying, okay, so you don't have the stability and credibility that you used to have, and you want to charge me 3 times more than you used to charge me.
But that's also kind of raises an even bigger issue, because if you go back 2 years before the crazy price hikes on the cost to send an international SMS, brands viewed SMS as a premium channel, because for them to send a message, it's maybe, depending on where you are, it could be 1 cent, it could be 3-4 cents, for example, and up to I think 6 or 7 cents in Germany. Yeah. And the issue that you had there was that brands are then thinking, well, actually, I'm comparing the cost to send one message compared to the cost to send an email or something over, kind of in-app push notification, which obviously have two fundamentally different business models, but the pricing, is a factor of X significantly cheaper than SMS. But now all of a sudden, the average cost of an international message has gone up from just over 3 cents from 2021 to about 6.5 cents. That's the average cost. And, there are some operators that have increased the price so much that, it's almost cheaper to fly there with the message than actually send it as an SMS. Maybe, slight exaggeration, but you get my point. And it's, and it's all in context, because every channel's got a different use case and, different level of engagement and effectiveness. But, as Scott rightly is pointing out, we're potentially damaging what could be an incredible channel for brands.
Right. No, I think that's an area that we as an industry are definitely working through and thinking through, and how we can help there. I think the fact that the industry can absorb those price hikes is also interesting and shows the value of these different channels and how that can be used.
In the short term.
In the short term, yes. That's good point. Good point. As we look to wrap up here today, I wanted to ask about the employee side. What are some employee-based internal use cases that you're seeing from messaging that maybe companies that are out there listening to this could envision using for their own employees? Scott, do you have any examples that your organization is providing as an internal use case?
Yeah, so we basically, one of the products that I'm also involved in and we supply is what we call numbering, which is basically virtual mobile numbers. So we provide those in around 80 countries. What that means for some of our customers, the use case that they have is it enables their employees to have a separate line. So it's a telco number, but hosted within an application. They have the application on their phone. They also have the application on their computer and their desktop, so it seamlessly integrates with the other channels that they have. It means that they can send SMS internally as part of the communications channel, as well as making calls. One of our customers uses this because they have a lot of people in the field, so salespeople out and about around the world, actually. And this enables them to communicate between themselves whilst using let's say a work number. So the classical kind of bring your own device model, but enabling people to carry one device, but with multiple numbers on it.
Right.
So we power this. As I say, we have around 80 countries that we have coverage on. It includes, some of those are voice services, some of them are messaging services, some of them are both. And we see that as quite a powerful tool. And we power a number of other applications, actually third-party applications as well, where we provide the base connectivity for them.
No, that's great. I think kind of the one number concept is very powerful in how we can work inside of our work environment. Now, Nick, when we started, you talked about kind of defining CPaaS as users interacting with a brand. But as we look at kind of inside organizations, is there anything there that you might be able to share, whether that's a use case or other data, and how you've broken that down?
There is, but I mean, I think there's a couple of points to make. Is that if you look at how people use SMS, everyone's used, saying the demise of SMS from a peer-to-peer, so a person-to-person, consumer-to-consumer perspective, and that's all obviously pretty much migrated onto WhatsApp in the majority of markets where WhatsApp is dominant. But it's the same with email. If you look at personal email now, all of that has gone onto WhatsApp as well. And that's something that's really overlooked by pretty much everyone. If you look at your email today, well, for me, my Yahoo, it's just full of spam. There's pretty much no meaningful emails in there whatsoever anymore. So, that's kind of how powerful WhatsApp is becoming. So it's mentioned, it's consumed P2P SMS, it's doing the same with email. And, so you're starting to see use cases with WhatsApp where, it's becoming B2B as well, massively. So you're starting to see organizations start to say, well, actually, it's a great way of communicating with your clients in the B2B space. So not just B2C. So then you've got, the whole A to P, P to A evolves into, kind of A to B, B to A, so all these use cases start to expand and all of a sudden, the potential for these things fundamentally expands. So that's kind of, I think, a key point to kind of to address there in terms of how organizations can potentially use it. I mean, it'll really also depend on the cost. That's going to be part of the issue, I think. And if the cost is manageable, and maybe there are going to be different pricing models that evolve, then you could see more and more companies adopt rich messaging as a means of communicating internally. That doesn't actually answer your question, Kevin. Do you want to repeat it? Because I forgot. I was stalling then. Sorry.
No. So I think you hit on some new use cases where organizations will be able to actually use some of the OTT channels
Yep.
as part of their business. And when I work with different companies in Asia, Indonesia particularly, I send an email, it's crickets. So WhatsApp is, to your point, has become their new email. And that's how they interact both internally and externally. So I think there is a new and evolving role. These channels are so rich that they're able to do so much more, and so that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So Scott, we were together last week at ITW. What's on tap over the next month or so? Any other conferences, travel plans? What's happening in the life of Scott Warner over the next few weeks?
Yeah, well, I'm based in Germany, but I'm in the UK next week on a little bit of business, but also a little bit of family stuff, and then China at the, when is that? The week after? Oh yeah, it is the week after. And then in China the week after. As you can imagine, S&BTS is actually based in Japan. Our main market is Asia. China is obviously one of our biggest markets, being Asian based. So that's going to soon become a regular route. And then looking forward to, there's in Europe, there's the GCCM in Berlin in June, and there's also the Capacity SMS World in London in June. So potentially one or the other or both. So plenty going on. I think the post-COVID travel boom is continuing, which is great.
Yeah, clearly, I have not seen an empty seat on any of my flights lately, so there seems to be plenty of people out and about. How about you, Nick? What's up for you, and maybe share where our audience could access some of the work that you do and the reports that you've written.
Yeah, thanks. So for me, very much the same shows that Scott mentioned in terms of the Capacity Messaging event in London and also GCCM in Berlin. Both great events, and anyone interested in messaging should certainly look at those. Worth attending. But for me, travel across Europe, looking at helping clients and speaking at a few client events. So can share a few more thoughts with clients and their audience. But otherwise, if anyone's interested, then it's mobilesquared.co.uk, and within that we do give away quite a lot of free data. We share a lot of our presentations on SMS. We've got for us, a holistic view of messaging is the Messageverse, and that's also our portal has about 75 million data points in, as I mentioned, covering all aspects of messaging, and that's where is kind of the base of finding out what we can do and help companies.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we appreciate it, and we really appreciate the collaboration with both of you within the CPaaS Acceleration Alliance. Our report that we did, we relied on a lot of the data that you provide, and then we work with many of our members to kind of validate that in the real world. And so I think we've got a good combination, and really appreciate the time that we've had here today. And we look forward to getting together at one of these upcoming shows and meeting again in person. And upwards and onwards. Appreciate your time.
Indeed.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks,
Bye.
Nick.